KTM has been in India for over 10 years now, but in the grand scheme of things, that's still not a whole lot, especially compared to some other manufacturers. But that hasn't stopped the Austrian company from making a big impact on the Indian motorcycle market and an even bigger impact on the Indian motorcyclist. Here's a company that came along and exposed us to a level of motorcycles that we previously did not receive here in India, and a large part of that process has been the extremely likeable RC 390. This is a little bike that was considered pretty serious and hardcore even by European and American small capacity standards when it first arrived. And it was a hit in India too. But that was back in 2014. Since then, the updates to this bike have been relatively minor, until now, because here, finally, is the 2022 RC 390. Let's dive in.
I don't take orders, I take empires. Wanna play ball? I'm your umpire. I don't care what you think, no you don't deserve me. That's not both the cage, no you don't disturb me. Bottom to the top, brick house trophies, bankroll, superstar feeling holy.
This is a big update, so this new RC's numbers are bigger and better than before. But there are a couple of undesirable areas where the numbers are bigger as well. Weight and price. KTM's literature will go to great lengths to tell you how these new wheels and brakes are a good deal lighter than before, and how weight has been shaved from areas like the frame and the chain guard. But the fact is, the bike as a whole has become a good deal heavier over time. And by the time this one here is fueled up and ready to ride, you'll be aboard a 172 kilo machine. That's 8 kilos more than it weighed when it first launched. And at rupees 3.14 lakh, it's also 36,000 rupees more expensive than it used to be, and over a lakh more expensive than when it first launched. When it launched, it came here as a lightweight, affordable sports bike. Does it still tick these boxes? The previous RC had a reputation for being a super sharp handling machine, but it did require a precise and experienced hand to get the most out of it. This new bike retains most of that cornering capability, but it's certainly become a lot easier to ride hard. It's an agile, sweet handling, natural feeling motorcycle, and the chassis behaves quite predictably for the most part. I don't think the front end quite talks to you the way it used to, but there's no denying that this is now a more neutral and friendly motorcycle. Most parts of the handling package give you the confidence you need to quickly find speed on this bike, and all that extra weight isn't really apparent from the saddle. But the one weak link here is the tires, specifically the rear hoop. The Metzeler Sportbike M5 tires were one of the biggest highlights on the RC 390 when it first launched. But ever since they dropped from a W speed rating to an H, they've never quite been the same. And on this bike too, a number of us at the test track today found it losing traction at the rear. And I personally had a particularly big moment when the rear end lost grip and snapped sideways without warning when leaning into a corner with an open throttle. Brakes are all new as well, and pretty radical looking actually. The front disc has lost its carrier and is now mounted directly to the wheel spokes, which looks quite neat. There are only a couple of hard braking zones at Bajaj's test track, but we did get some idea of what the new brakes are like. They're not gonna wow you, but they do seem to have taken a step in the right direction, and they work pretty well. Another area that's changed massively, of course, is the design. And the story here is quite similar to what we said about the RC200 earlier, which is that this design looks a great deal better in person than it does in pictures. Especially on the 390, because this is the only RC to get this blue color scheme, and it looks quite neat. It contrasts well against the orange on the rest of the motorcycle, and the blue panels have this matte satin finish that looks quite great. The RC feels well built and sturdy, but finish levels in some areas could improve a little. The switchgear doesn't feel the nicest to operate, it's a bit clicky, and some of the panel gaps are not so tidy. Like it or not, there are some irrefutable benefits of this new design. KTM says it's more aerodynamically efficient than before, and the fairings need fewer fasteners to stay in place. We did feel that the windscreen provides a little better coverage at full tuck, and we were even able to hit the limiter in 6th gear at 175 kph. So it slices through the air a little better than before, and it's now also got a slightly larger helping hand from the engine. Changes in this department are limited to a larger airbox and consequently slightly more torque. Power remains the same at 43.5 horsepower, which is still enough for the RC to hold its position as comfortably the most powerful motorcycle in its class.
This engine's internals have remained pretty much the same through the years, but it's a very different feeling motor today to what it was when it first arrived. Today it feels quite tractable and linear with no glaring flat spots or spikes in the power band.
The throttle is also quite smooth now and vibrations seem to be more in check as well. KTM says the acceleration to 60 and 100 kph has improved over the old bike, and we'll verify that with our V-Box when we can. But beyond 120 kph, the acceleration trails off quite noticeably, and while it's probably comparable to the BS6 motorcycle immediately before it, this new RC doesn't quite pull as hard as the older BS4 bike that I've had the pleasure of owning.
If you think the changes to the engine are on the milder side, you'll be more impressed by what KTM has done with the electronics on this new RC. The big news, of course, is the addition of a Bluetooth-equipped TFT display and an IMU, which means you get cornering ABS. KTM is also now capitalizing on the ride-by-wire system and offering you traction control, and the bi-directional quickshifter from the Adventure and Duke is now also on the RC390.
That quickshifter was a little rough around the edges when it first debuted in 2020, but the unit on this new RC seems to work quite well, at least on track. How well it deals with low RPM path throttle shifts in the city is something we'll have to see at a later date. What didn't seem to be working quite so well is the traction control system. I had a number of moments of the rear stepping out on me when rolling on the gas out of a corner, and even that one moment where it suddenly snapped sideways, there didn't seem to be a great helping hand from the electronics. Now, Bajaj's test track was quite dusty on this day, and that could have played some part in the rear grip issues we faced here, but the front tyre didn't seem to be affected by this dust. Again, we'll know more about exactly how well the system works and how good the tyres are when we get to ride this bike on Mumbai's slippery roads pretty soon, especially with the monsoon just around the corner. That new TFT display is borrowed from its fellow 390 siblings, so the story is a familiar one. It works smoothly, is bright enough and well laid out. Once your phone is hooked up, you can enjoy features like music playback control, phone call alerts, and turn-by-turn navigation, though the last of those does come at extra cost. Headlights were never an issue with the old RC, but this new version gets an LED headlight, and if it's anything like the one on the RC200, it should do a great job of lighting up the dark. The focus of this test has been the racetrack, but some things about this new bike definitely stand out in terms of the new RC being a better road bike than before. The biggest thing here is ergonomics and comfort. The seating position is nowhere near as extreme and hardcore as it used to be. You're sat a little more upright and comfortably now, but you still feel nicely connected to the machine. And KTM gives you the option of dropping the handlebars slightly if you want to amplify that further. The seat is also much better shaped now and the cushioning is nicer too, which should help you remain in the saddle for longer. One final area with significant updates is suspension. Travel has gone up a good deal at both ends, and this new RC does get increased adjustability like we reported earlier, but not quite as much as we expected. The monoshock, which was previously adjustable only for preload, now also gets rebound damping adjustment. But the front fork is non-adjustable, which is quite disappointing, since Bajaj builds this bike with an adjustable front fork here in India for export markets. And this bike's big rival, the TVS Apache RR310, also gets a very reasonably priced optional kit with adjustable suspension at both ends. Our track ride didn't give us too much scope to assess ride quality, but the extra travel on offer here and our time spent with the updated RC200 tells us that this new 390 should offer a more comfortable ride than before. Here on track, the suspension worked well at keeping mass transfer in check, and the bike remained quite stable even when flicking from side to side.
The KTM RC390 is still a very nice little motorcycle, just a slightly different sort of nice than before. It's no longer the razor-sharp, raw-feeling machine that it once was, but this update has made it a more well-rounded and versatile motorcycle. And even though we've only ridden it on track so far, I can tell you that it certainly makes for a better road bike than the old one. And despite that, it hasn't made any significant compromise in its racetrack abilities. There is still enjoyment and learning to be had in riding this motorcycle hard, just a slightly different sort. And the one major shortcoming in this area is something that I as a potential buyer can rectify, so it's not really a deal breaker. And then there's the price. At 3.14 lakh rupees, it's 36,000 more than it used to be, but it justifies that with all the improvements that have been made. But more importantly, it's 50,000 rupees more expensive than the Apache RR310, which isn't quite as quick or powerful, but it does have many other strengths. Can the KTM justify that premium? That's something we hope to find out soon.